Hi, I'm Tom R., and I'm pleased to welcome you to Village Connect. So for our conversation this session, turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 8. I want you to read verses 1 through 11, and when you've finished, come back and we'll get the conversation started. So these men, they bring this woman to Jesus, and they test him. The law of Moses says she is to be stoned. She was caught in the act of adultery. Jesus, what do you say? If you have a study Bible, you might notice that there's some footnotes on this passage because the earliest manuscripts of the Gospel of John, they don't include this story. It was later the church kept putting this story back in until finally it gets included here at the beginning of chapter 8. And sometimes I wish they'd left the story out. It's a hard story to read. It's awful to think about the practice of stoning. It's awful to see the treatment of women the way they did in this story. It's a story that makes us feel like this can't teach us anything. There's nothing we can relate to here. But what these men were doing, if I understand it, is they saw something they thought was wrong and they wanted it to be right. And that's something we understand. If you've seen something wrong in your life, it is in us. We want it to be made right. It had to be 30 years ago. I went to the theater to see a movie called The Witness. Maybe you saw it. In it, a very young Harrison Ford plays a guy named John Book. He is hiding in an Amish community. He dresses like the Amish. He talks like the Amish. He eats like the Amish, but his heart is not Amish. But he's hidden in there, and one day the community and their horse and buggy, they go into town and they're encountered by some bullies. Some young thugs start teasing them and harassing them and bullying them, and the Amish, they just take it because they have a commitment to nonviolence. It's not a commitment that John Book shared. And so he gets out of the chariot, or out of the buggy, and he walks to the bullies, and as they start teasing him, assuming he's Amish to the core, he breaks the guy's nose. When that happened, the whole theater erupted, because when we see something that's wrong, we want it to be made right. That's what these guys were about in their own way. So they come to Jesus and they say, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Moses said she should be stoned. What do you say, Jesus? And the text says he started drawing in the dirt. What was he drawing in the dirt? Some say what he was drawing in the dirt was the sins of the men who brought this woman. He was spelling it out for them. I don't know, that would be a little confrontive, but maybe. It just doesn't tell us. Others say, no, he wasn't doing that. He was just giving them a moment. Just taking a moment, that in the emotion of this crowd, he just takes a breath. Sometimes we need to do that. He's just giving them a moment to think about what they're about to do. You know, when our emotions run high, sometimes that's not the best place for us to make moral decisions. Some say what he was doing was just giving them a moment. But I wonder why they came to him at all. They already say they know what they're supposed to do. The law of Moses said this woman is to be stoned, and yet they bring this hot potato to Jesus to test him. And I wonder if the reason they do that is because they're feeling a little tested themselves. You know, this is the truth of law, of policies, of practices. They may be clear in writing, but in living, they've got to be interpreted. We've got to choose how we live these out. I wonder if these men were feeling tested a bit themselves. There are two things in the text that make me wonder that. The first is this: they've brought the woman, but they didn't bring the man. The law says, if a man and woman are caught in adultery, both of them shall be stoned. But these men have already decided they can't stomach stoning this man to death for this infraction. They're already choosing how to live this law. Now, the treatment of men and women in different ways, that has a long history. And it continues till today, and it's not surprising to anyone to see that they're going to give this man a pass, and yet they're considering stoning this woman. But that's just it. They're considering it now. And the other thing in the text that makes me wonder if they've got some inner turmoil is Jesus says, okay, you who are without sin, you throw the first stone, and one by one, they drop those stones and they walk away. Now, does that make sense to you? That Jesus would just say one sentence, if you are without sin, you throw the first stone, and these guys who are in a mob mentality, they go, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. I'm not perfect. Maybe I shouldn't be throwing rocks at this woman. No. I don't think they would have gotten there unless there was at least a part of them that wanted to get there. Here's why I think the church kept putting this story in the gospel, kept reminding us of this moment with Jesus. If I understand the text, these men bring this woman to Jesus because they can't figure out themselves how to get around the law. They can't figure out themselves how to get around this ancient practice of stoning people who break God's law as if that's the way to bring righteousness. And yet there's something in them that's unsettled about this. And so they throw this hot potato to Jesus, maybe hoping he can give them an out. Maybe hoping he can show them a way to see this differently, and he does. He says, pay attention to your own righteousness, because in this act of violence, you're actually not furthering righteousness. And they drop their stones, and they walk away. This happens to us. There's sometimes something happens, and what seemed okay yesterday is not okay anymore. There was a day when we believed that slavery was an okay thing. It's not okay anymore. There was a day not so long ago that we believed that women should not be allowed to preach in Christian worship. There's still a lot of communities that think that, but we know better. It's not okay anymore. Sometimes things happen, and what seemed okay yesterday, it's not okay anymore. And we have to learn and see anew how it is we live God's call to righteousness in this time and in this place. I am so grateful for the courage of these men, because when Jesus opened their eyes, the stones they had brought, they dropped and they walked away. I don't know what we need to drop, but I know in our lives, sometimes things that were okay yesterday are not okay anymore. And we need to let go of these stones and walk away.